All right. Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Glad to be back.
Today, we're going to be talking about something that's been causing a bit of a stir among Indian expats over in the UAE.
Yeah.
It has to do with some recent changes to Indian tax laws and specifically how they affect those living abroad.
Right.
We've got some excerpts here from an article. It's titled, Indian Expats Rally Against Rising Income Tax Burdens in UAE.
Okay.
And we're going to kind of take a look at what exactly is changing, why people are so concerned about it, and also what they're doing about it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've been following this a little bit myself, and I'm very curious to see what actions they're taking.
So have you ever thought about how inflation could actually affect your taxes when you sell property abroad?
Oh, yeah.
Turns out it's a pretty big deal for Indian expats right now.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, the value of everything is going up.
Exactly.
So, naturally, the government's going to want to take a bigger cut.
Right. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. The big change here that's got everyone talking is the removal of something called the indexation benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sort of explain what that was all about and why its removal is causing such a fuss?
Yeah, so indexation, it basically allowed NRIs, non-resident Indians.
Right.
If they bought a property in India a while back and they're thinking about selling it now, indexation let them adjust the original price they paid for that property to account for inflation.
Okay.
So basically, they wouldn't be taxed on the full difference between what they bought it for and what they sold it for.
Right.
They'd only be taxed on the profit that's actually above and beyond inflation.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
if you bought a house, I don't know, back in 2010 for, say, 50 lakh rupees,
Right.
and you sell it today for 1 crore rupees, you wouldn't be taxed on that entire 50 lakh difference.
Exactly.
Because obviously the value of 50 lakhs back then is very different from the value of 50 lakhs today.
Exactly. And that's what indexation was all about. It was recognizing that inflation eats away at the value of money over time.
Right.
So you shouldn't be penalized for essentially making a profit that's just keeping pace with inflation.
Not true.
But now with this benefit gone, NRIs are going to be facing a much higher tax bill.
Right.
Because now they're going to be taxed on the entire gain, even the part that's just due to inflation.
So it does seem kind of unfair in a way, right?
Well, yeah.
Like the government's essentially sort of ignoring the effects of inflation on these property sales.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a significant change, and it's understandable why people would see it as unfair. They're being taxed on gains that aren't really real gains in a way.
Yeah. Do we have any idea why they decided to revoke this benefit now?
Well, there's always speculation around these kinds of things.
Of course, yeah.
Some people think it's because the government needs to increase its revenue.
Right.
Maybe they're trying to simplify the tax code, make it a little less complicated.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely a head scratcher for a lot of people.
And it's no surprise that the expat community isn't exactly taking this lying down. The article that we have here talks about how they're actually mobilizing over in the UAE
Oh, wow.
to try and do something about this. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it seems like they're really taking this seriously. A lot of the community groups over there are actually urging expats to write to the Indian Finance Minister directly
Okay.
before the budget announcement that's happening this Saturday.
Oh, wow.
They're basically, expressing their concerns, proposing some alternatives
Okay.
to this change.
So it's not just complaining. They're actually trying to be proactive and find some solutions.
Exactly.
Are there any specific alternative solutions that they've suggested?
Yeah, there are a couple of interesting ideas floating around. Some groups are suggesting maybe a phased removal of the indexation benefit.
Okay.
So instead of just cutting it off completely and maybe gradually phase it out over time, that would give people a little more time to adjust.
Makes sense, yeah.
Others are talking about maybe targeted exemptions
Right.
for certain types of properties or for NRIs who have been living abroad for a really long time.
I see.
So yeah, it's clear that they're putting a lot of thought into this and they're really trying to come up with some workable solutions.
Yeah. It's interesting because this tax change, it kind of has implications that go beyond just, the individual NRIs who are affected by it.
Right.
It could potentially have a pretty big impact on the Indian real estate market as well.
Oh, absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if fewer expats are willing to sell their properties in India
Yeah.
because of this higher tax burden, it could definitely slow down the market.
Right.
We might see fewer sales,
Okay.
maybe even a decrease in property values,
Right.
especially in areas where you have a lot of NRI-owned properties.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
One change can kind of ripple outwards and affect all these other things.
Absolutely. And it's a really good example of how these seemingly technical changes to tax laws
Yeah.
can actually have these really broad consequences.
So for our listeners out there who might NRIs themselves
Right.
and maybe a little bit concerned about all this,
Mm.
what what can they actually do? What does the article suggest?
Well, writing to the finance minister, like we mentioned before, is a great first step.
Okay.
Making your voice heard, letting them know your concerns.
Right.
Also joining some of these community groups
Right.
can be really helpful.
Okay.
You can stay informed
Yeah.
about what's happening. You can connect with other people who are in the same boat.
Right.
And there's strength in numbers. That's
That's
definitely something I would recommend.
knowledge is power, as they say,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to your money.
absolutely.
This whole situation also kind of brings up a bigger question.
Right.
How do governments balance their need to raise revenue
Mm-hmm.
with the needs and the interests of their citizens who are living abroad?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It's a complex issue, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy.
You have economic factors.
Yeah.
You have social implications,
Hmm.
individual rights to consider.
Yeah.
It's a real balancing act.
And it seems like open communication is really important in that, right?
Absolutely.
Like, governments need to be talking to their citizens.
Right.
And citizens need to be talking to their governments to try to figure out what's the best way forward.
I think that's the key to finding solutions that work for everyone.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We've covered a lot of ground here today, from the specifics of this tax change to the potential ripple effects.
It's amazing how one small change can have such a big impact.
And the thing is, tax laws, they're constantly changing.
Right.
It's so important to stay informed. If you're listening to this and you're personally affected by these changes, I definitely recommend checking out the resources that are mentioned in the article that we were talking about.
Good advice.
Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.